I think a huge part of it is to just create the framework for what capitalism was demanding, was like a further integration of these two economies to make it so that they could withstand a continued accelerated shift in multipolar global capitalism, and that by opening these markets to the US and taking away certain aspects of the border to make it so that Canadian companies have more incentive to invest in America and vice versa. And because of the push on the labor policy, because of the push on immigration, it's going to create a false scarcity on the labor market in a condition where people will be more willing to work in more precarious. What they'll probably do is also implement a temporary worker or migrant worker policy, which will subject people to the state, to a new open border state that is in greater cooperation between the US, Canada, and Mexico. It will subject those people. It will make them intelligible to the state. But then what it will also do is give them a certain worker status that will make it so that they are able to work. They're not considered illegal, but what they are is not citizens, so that they don't have the same rights as citizens. So it's going to just create a false scarcity on the exploitable labor market, which is going to make it so that there is a demand for greater status to be given to immigrants so that they're considered not illegal, and that those people will be more willing to get that status because otherwise they're considered illegal in a place where it's far more criminal to be illegal, which will then make it so that those people are willingly subjected to a new open border state, and then that will make it so that they're willing to come work in Canada in a mine and stuff like that. So that those corporations, like American corporations who would have otherwise not invested in Canada because there's not a labor market, will now have a labor market. Trump is creating the framework for that by using bolstered rhetoric, by using a tough guy rhetoric, so that the negotiation, when we concede our sovereignty to that, it's like we're getting a good deal, but we're actually submitting to an entirely new trade agreement. The hilarious irony of all of this, though, is that that's actually what needs to happen in order to maintain global peace, because otherwise you corner American imperial interests. That's what would have happened if Harris won. You would have cornered imperial interests to have to lash out in a way that they wouldn't if you had someone who was willing to be a strongman and say, hey, Canada, you're ours now. Hey, Mexico, you're ours now. Because by doing that, now they don't have to say, hey, Syria, you're ours now. Not to say that they're not going to, but in the actual practical way of having to go to Iraq, like they get this certain type of high quality oil from either Venezuela, Iran, Iraq, or Canada. 3 of those are really not an option unless you want to take a military operation. The other one is very much an option. You just have to be willing to negotiate and create these conditions that both countries would be up for that to happen. The thing about that is that that's very not the thing that a Republican would do. So that's the thing, though. I'm not saying this is good. I'm saying that that's why doing these types of trade, these greater trade consolidations of power through capitalism is the path forward for peace. And it's not great, but it's either annihilation or greater exploitation because of capitalism. And the reason that that framework has been set is because of China refusing to play like a kinetic warfare game with the US and just saying, we're not going to war with you. We're just going to do capitalism better than you. And that's the thing, is that Biden Harris were just they kept pushing and pushing and pushing to create the situation where China needed to use force. It never really happened. They used military operations and stuff like that against Taiwan. But the thing is that they always need to be nice to their people in the imperial core. They need to give their treats to their people in the imperial core to make it seem like they're liberal and progressive. Trump doesn't give a fuck about that. And this is his calculus. He would rather take on a domestic opposition than have to deal with geopolitical insanity, like being a pariah on the geopolitical stage. That's why he's always trading off, looking like an asshole domestically with social shit and domestic policy that it includes immigration and stuff like that, because he's willing to say those things that capitalism demands, that the Biden administration and the Democrats can't do because it goes against their entire ideology. But you still saw them try to by being super hard on the border, basically adopting Trump's policy on the border. But that's the thing, is that they still won't say racist shit. And it's the racist shit that makes him have a political base. But what he also doesn't do is go out and cause gigantic wars. He literally threatened Kim Jong-un in his last presidency, openly threatened him and said, if Rocket Man wants to play with his weapons, we'll show him, blah, blah, blah. What did he end up doing after saying that? He's the only fucking leader since 1945 to have any diplomatic relationship with North Korea. So every time he says insane shit like that, it ends up, he did more diplomatically on Korea than any president before him. Maybe Jimmy Carter, you can say. And I'm not endorsing Trump in any way. He's obviously a terrible fucking person. But because he's so incompetent and self-serving that he's willing to do and say that shit, he will say what's needed to garner his base domestically. But he's also such a self-serving narcissist that needs to be accepted among his peers as a global leader that then makes him a moderate geopolitically. Like, he's not a hawk. JD Vance is a fucking hawk. So I don't know how that's going to work. But anyways,